What is it like to be the face and voice of China to the world? Well, Liu Xin is the star anchor for the English language news channel CGTN, China Global Television Network. With a potential audience of millions of people around the world, it is a powerful platform of influence, telling a compelling story from China's perspective. But is it news or propaganda? This week, Liu Xin will lead coverage of the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party at a time of rising tension with the West. And she joins me now from Beijing. Liu Xin, it's a real pleasure to have you on the program. It's a great opportunity to have just this type of dialogue that is absolutely necessary. And in that spirit, can I ask you this? You are there to present news from a Chinese perspective, but is it the reality that it is news from a Chinese Communist Party perspective?
It's a great pleasure, Stan, and I'm humbled to be one of the voices or faces representing China. There are many other people who represent truly the spirit of China and the Chinese people. And so to answer your question, I think there is a very important distinction that has to be made, which is the relationship between the Communist Party of China and the Chinese people. In foreign countries, often people pitch these two against each other. They're separated, whereas in China, you have to understand that the Communist Party is really a part of the people. It represents the people. It's a huge party, 92 million people out of 1.4 billion. That's a very high percentage. First of all. Secondly, this is the only major party. I say major party, big party. There are 8 other parties that are non-communist parties, but this is the biggest party that's been ruling the country for many years. And thirdly, it's not a party in people's textbook definition, which represents, the proletarians or the working class alone. It represents everybody. It has grown to represent every sector of the society: workers, farmers, intellectuals, officials, business people, including millionaires, even billionaires, and students, if they're old enough. People who are retired, and it represents people who live in the coastal areas or inland areas, developed areas, less developed areas, cities, countryside. It really has the widest possible roots in the Chinese society. So what CGTN does, instead of being on the opposite side against the government or against the people, we actually connect these two.
But when it comes to that, you are a state broadcaster. What you say is ultimately vetted, is it not, by the Chinese Communist Party? And there are Chinese Communist Party members at CGTN to ensure that that party line is delivered. In that case, then, could it not be anything but propaganda? It is not a critical voice of the party.
Let me show you how I do my program. I have a weeknight discussion show, an opinion show called The Point. It's named after me. So 2 kinds of ways we decide our topics. Sometimes it is suggested. If a big event is coming up, for instance, the 100th anniversary of the founding of the party, of course, we're going to plan ahead and we're going to do related topics. And sometimes we come up, or I personally come up with topics that I think is important. For instance, climate change. For instance, the idea of a new Cold War, some people are talking, or Hong Kong or Xinjiang, and I'll propose these topics, and people, it's a collective process as well. The editorial board, together with my team members, as part of it, will decide which are the topics to pursue, which are necessary, which are current affairs in time, which there is a lot of interest. And then we decide, okay, this is the topic we're going to do. We're going to find the guests that can represent the views from different sides. Not always possible, I must admit. Sometimes it's difficult to find the other side of the voice. And then we propose questions, and then we conduct these interviews. The show is live. The show is live. There's nobody to put a gunpoint at someone and say, you have to say this or you have to say that, or otherwise, if I don't tell a certain line, I'm going to lose my job. No, it comes from here. And it comes from here. What I believe, what I see, what I think, what I know as facts, that's what I do.
But Liu Xin, The parameters, though, are set, aren't they? You've mentioned it's the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party. Would you be able to use the language of genocide, which has been used by the United States, other countries, human rights organisations, about the treatment of people in Xinjiang? Would you be able to speak critically and openly? Would you be able to speak critically and openly about the democracy protests in Hong Kong and locking up people in Hong Kong for democracy protests? Would you be able, just one more example, sorry, and then I'd like to hear from you, but would you be able to critically look at the Tiananmen massacre, for instance, and talk about what really occurred on that day? Are those things that are open to you to discuss?
Well, there are sensitivities in every country, and we have to respect the fact that there are topics that are considered taboo, that are considered sensitive. But it's a very tiny, list, I would say. Most of the time we discuss, for instance, the so-called genocide that you use, we discussed multiple times. It's also discussed on the Chinese language channel. Let's not forget, my show is in English and I'm primarily aiming at an international audience. So we have to cater to the kind of suspicion, criticism coming from outside. We have to react to them. The protest in Hong Kong, of course, there are people who come in and say, you know, the protesters have their grievances, which could be legitimate as well. And we're not saying they're always violent. Some of them are peaceful. And you have to look at what's on their mind, what really drives them to go out and protest and even resort to violence, so on and so forth. We discuss these topics, but you know, we have to talk about it from a factual perspective. Accusation is accusation. Truth is truth. Reality is reality. We are not going to say, because some people is accusing China of something, that is what we take as reality. We have to bring the reality out there.
Here is also a fact. Organisations like Apple Daily in Hong Kong have now been closed, and the owner is now on charges and facing goodness knows how long in jail. Journalists are locked up in China. We know that to be a fact, and foreign journalists have had to leave the country. How does that sit with you as a journalist and sit with the idea of press freedom?
There is a little bit of the sound volume is a little bit low, but I think I get the gist of your question. It is a very difficult time for journalism to truly shine. Journalists are caught in the crossfire of political conflicts, of ideological confrontation, you know, great power competition. While you are talking about what has happened or what you believe has happened in these part of China, let's not forget Chinese journalists have also been made very difficult to work in other parts of the world, right? We were labeled as some kind of a foreign agent, for instance, in the United States. So these actions some of the actions are reciprocal. I'm not saying all of the actions are. And when you talk about some news organizations being closed, such as in the case of Hong Kong, we have to understand journalists or the press do not operate in China, as in Australia, as in any part of the world. They do not operate above the law. So if there is any suspicion, evidence that they might have broken the law, justice have to be exercised. So simple.
What happens when that law means that journalists are jailed? And I want to ask you about something that obviously is very sensitive for you at CGTN, and obviously has been a big concern here in Australia with the Australian journalist who is a colleague of yours, Chung Lei, who is now behind bars and awaiting a very uncertain and very concerning fate. What does that say about CGTN, about press freedom? How did you view that when your colleague, Chung Lei, was arrested and is now being detained?
Of course, I'm aware of the situation. Actually, I have known Chen Lei for years because she has been working with CGTN and its predecessor for years. I'm not very close to her. We normally, you know, have a working relationship. But on the other hand, what she does or what has happened in her private life or in her time outside of the office, I am not aware, and I'm not in the position to comment on an ongoing legal case. I do want to say that I hope her children are taken good care of. It's a difficult period of time, and I hope and I trust that she will get a fair trial and treatment according to all the relevant laws and norms. That's all I can tell you at this moment.
What was the reaction inside CGTN to her arrest, and does that then impact on the way that you do your job? Are other journalists concerned that this could also be their fate?
You know, we deal with sensitive issues sometimes, and we deal with information that can be seen as related to national security, and I think that's the situation with journalists everywhere. So there is this layer of national security risk. I cannot deny that. I don't think it is a campaign aimed at any particular group of people. It is, I believe, it is an individual case. If someone breaks the law, it has, there will be consequences. I believe, I hope, and I trust that she will get a fair trial. That's all I can tell. For the other journalists, of course, for the international journalists, there are people who feel that will they be targeted? I think that's absolutely not the case. We are an open environment. We have hundreds of journalists working in Beijing or in Nairobi, Washington, London, anywhere else in the world. They have been able to carry on their job, and they have, their contribution, their understanding of how we operate. And yeah, it's a willing process. I mean, if you like to work here, you work here. If you don't feel secure to work here, you're free to leave. It's just like any other news organization.
Is it like any other news organization, Liu Xin? You've lived and worked in the West. You know what media freedom is in the West. You know that Western organisations are free to criticise their government, to raise uncomfortable issues. People are free to protest. People are free to raise issues. And it's a very robust environment. That is not the case in China, and you've just outlined that there are laws that prohibit that. That can't be, by any definition, media freedom as we understand it, can it?
I think, yes, there are different understanding, different definition of the role of the media. As I said, here in China, for the domestic audience, the role of the media has been one of a bridge, one to inform policymakers, to inform the general public, but overall to increase understanding of different sectors of society, so people can rally behind the same goals for the future. So it's very much a uniting factor instead of a factor that pitch one part of the society against another, either public to government, or one party against or followers of one party or to followers of another party. So it serves this kind of a function.
Can I just get some thoughts on you on this moment, because you've outlined this fundamental, I think, lack of understanding that how the West sees China and perhaps how the China sees the West as well. With the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party, with this environment that some have described, and you've alluded to this, as potentially a new Cold War, where is this heading from a Chinese perspective? What is the end game here, if you like?
I describe China as just another member of the international community or international family, if you will. I mean, China just celebrated the 50th anniversary of its of the restoration of its lawful seat in the United Nations, and Chinese State Councillor and Foreign Minister Wang Yi said China's vote will always go to the developing countries. And he mentioned China's vote, not China's votes. Oh, every country, as anybody else, big or small, has only one vote. So China is a member, an equal member, and hopefully a responsible member of the international community. I don't think China should aim for more, or through its size or strength, and China should not be treated any less either. At the end of the day, the end game, if I can look into the future, I hope there will be peaceful coexistence of all countries in the world, despite their political differences, despite their ideologies, despite their strengths, or whatever. Every country will be able to exist in peace and prosper. There shouldn't be this idea that because you are different or you do things differently from us, you have to change to become like us. I don't think that is the right way to go. If Western countries or advanced economies give that pressure and have that vision for China, they're going to be very, very disappointed. The 100-year celebration of the CPC, I think the biggest message is the Chinese system worked under the leadership of the CPC. The Chinese people are happy and proud that their lives have changed fundamentally, and they're not going to give it up for anybody else to please anybody else, to be accepted into any club. No, we will continue to independently pursue our path, and please don't say, you are not like us, you are not good enough, why don't you do things our way?
It's been a pleasure to talk to you. It's a great opportunity to have just this type of conversation, and I really appreciate you giving us your time, Liu Xin. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Stan.